Hey, so it is Thursday and it's one of our last days here. And yeah, today we started off strong. We went to the very edge of, because the city here we are in, it's actually not a city, it's a town. We start at this point and we go to this edge, and then for the first time, today we went to the other edge, which is farther away, and it requires a couple hours of walking, and we did that. We went there, and it was nice. We took pictures, and we have this natural thing that is basically like you have like these mountains, but from the view by the sea, like you see kind of like the sides of it, and then it is just a really beautiful kind of like it's kind of like art, but it's made by nature. So as we are walking, we kind of like go around it, and there's a lot of like native vegetation and lots of it was just very beautiful. The whole walk, like the time that we went there, every site that we saw was pretty beautiful. It was very nice to look at, and I registered most things, so I'm happy with that. I even ran out of storage halfway through our journey, so I ended up having to delete some files quickly, so I have more room, but in the end we registered everything, and yeah, I'm happy. I think I'm back at being happy with like taking pictures. That is something that throughout the years, it was something. I think registering moments has always been something I was very much into, and I always I was kind of like the thing that I was doing. People always like rely on me taking pictures, recording like the moments, registering everything, and it is something that I took kind of like an interest in. And not only registering moments and if something's happening, but also registering like the things that I see throughout life. So sometimes some nice flowers, some cool graffiti, some beautiful sight, whatever it is, and like that's been kind of something that it is interest I have, but then I get depressed, and then I kind of lose it, and I end up like not doing it. So it was nice to have this moment. It pretty much shows that my head is doing okay. Today I once again did not take one of the medications I was taking, and I think that I was all the better off for it. I really think that my head was better without it, or maybe that's the thing, like you have to keep like not taking it for me to just really assess it, because could be like something else that happened, and I'm just attributing it to not taking medication. And I talked about before how when I started taking it back in like January, like the first few weeks they were great, and then stopped being great. I went back to the same mess that it always was the case, and the medication doesn't take effect like immediately, so it was probably not even the medication that got me doing very well. I don't It was just like probably like a moment that I went through that things were working out pretty well, and that was kind of the case there. But yeah, so today was nice. We ended up walking a lot, and we're gonna go to this pizzeria later today that my uncle, my dad's brother, he went to, and he really likes it because he also really likes the city that we are in, which once again not a city, it's a town, it's a municipality that is part of the bigger city. And it has like a couple of this. Actually, I don't really know exactly which counts and which doesn't, because we went through some of them. Like some of them I know for a fact that they're part of this municipality, and they're part of some of them, they're part of this city. So it's kind of like a Russian doll. So there is this trickle down. It trickles down. Like the big city, then the municipality, then the town, and the order. I don't know which is the order, and I don't really need to know. Although to be fair, sometimes when I have these questions, it is very much on me to actually Google it and figure it out. Although you don't always have the most straightforward answers. Maybe it has to do with like how you're asking the questions. But I don't think that I'm asking well, that I'm not like I'm being objective, and I am asking the right information. But yeah, it is what it is. But anyways, kind of like enough of that. I wanted to talk about my head, because today was a really fun day. We went out and we did a lot of fun things, but my head was not in the place I wanted it to be. I was very much still like invested in some fantasies, some of the ones that I don't want to be crowding my head, and yet that was the only thing that was in my mind today. That was the only thing that like when I was looking at things and I was going to it, it was just there. And it seemed to be like a very fertile moment for that because I'm having new ideas. I am having like a little conflict because I had set out like this whole story, and right now I'm kind of like revising some of it, so there is this conflicting information. I'm like, which one is better, which one should I do? And I realized that some of the revising has to do with like events that have happened ever since I started with this particular fantasy, and since I dropped it, which now I haven't I have undropped it. So like that was bad, that was not ideal, but it's been kind of like somewhat simple for me to just leave that particular fantasy to stay with my stories. Like I have my laptop right there, and once I'm done with this video, I'm gonna go down and I'm gonna go outside and I'm going to work on the novel just like I did yesterday, and I think I'm going to be very successful in that. It might have to do with like the part of the novel I am in, I'm having ideas, and also like I stopped because basically I'm at this point where I have to come up with some stuff that I haven't had thought about yet, which is exciting. It's good for me to just think about the stories and kind of like develop it. So that a good point to write this, and hopefully I'm going to keep going down the document and writing more. Yeah, that's kind of like my expectations for today before we go out. Yeah, no buts. Like I actually I'm hoping for the best here, and I have no reason to believe that it won't be. Something I'm actually thinking about right now is that I'm looking at my face, is that I tried not to wear my sunglasses today, but my nose is still like it's not peeling anymore, and it's really standing out. Although I will say that it seems that the rest of my face is kind of like it's matching. It's just like my nose that is standing out, but no, it is what it is. Because I think the bigger issue I have is my astigmatism, because it is on my left eye. I'm almost sure. Yeah, I think this is the astigmatism eye. And so like whenever you have like the sun directly in your face, when I have it directly in my face, like this eye, if I close this eye, I can kind of like handle it kind of well. It's just like when I have this this is the one that kind of like it fucks up, and it definitely has to do with my astigmatism. But yeah, so but like back to what I wanted to talk about, because I'm feeling very frustrated right now with my head and with like where I am at, and I know that like it's not the worst I've ever been, so much so that I will be able to kind of like work on my novel, which at certain points in times I haven't even been able to do. So this is not the worst, but it's also like not the best. And I think I'm frustrated because I was having such a good time. I'm having like I'm doing it like so well. I will say that also, like that as far as like healing goes, I think that I am healing, and I think that maybe some of the fantasies I have, like they are even helping with that. They're kind of like just putting something to rest, and in the process for me to just do that, I have to indulge in those fantasies. So it is kind of it is what it is. I've kind of accepted it, and because the ultimately what I don't want is for hopelessness to settle in, because I can be quite hopeless but still like seem to be kind of pretty normal. It's just that my thoughts, they take a certain connotation, and then like they really just go with it and go to like the extremes. So basically they think that the end is the solution to everything, and sometimes it's hard to argue. Is particularly when my head started getting bombarded by things, which did happen a couple of times today. And the detail, it was not because I saw or heard anything, it was just like my head just did that. It does that sometimes, but usually it gets like that when I see something. There's something that triggers that, but sometimes it just comes out of nowhere. It's almost as if like my brain's like a magnet for bad news, usually. And I say bad news, it's not just news, it's topics, things, a variety of them, from the past, that they come back, and then they rob me of my faith in humanity and the desire of being part of it. And that's kind of like the worst case scenario, because I am kind of like an active person. Sometimes people, they just sit with their emotions like that and then they go away. The issues that sometimes like I actually try to do it. So like that's an issue, that's a problem. And I think that I've been able to steer away from like from that side of my brain, because that's the thing, it is not kind of like, it's not a bug, it's basically a feature. It's kind of like what I realized, is that there's always going to be a part of my brain that is like that. And like wanting for it to be completely gone, like that is unreasonable. That is because it's unreasonable, because it's very unlikely that it's going to happen. It's been with me for the longest time, and for as long as I can remember, there's always been like that part of my brain that is like that. So what I have to do, instead of like trying to make it go away, is to work with it. Make sure that like even when my head is having certain thoughts, those thoughts, that I don't actually give them voice, to act in terms of like actually doing something in real life. They just stay there. And having better coping mechanisms is kind of like the takeaway here. I still don't know how to do that, because what are the coping mechanisms that I have? There is fantasizing, like that is number one. Usually I create this scenario in my head that is completely unrelated to the thing that is happening IRL. A scenario in which I can actually process those things, and it is not the worst. It's not the worst coping mechanism. The issue is that I kind of like sometimes I get very invested and very involved, so I want those scenarios to be my reality, and like they're not gonna be, because they're fantasies, and that just leads to a lot of frustration, and that frustration can really grow to be something quite overwhelming, which is also, so that is a corner of my head. Same way, that is not a bug, it's a feature. I have to kind of like accept that I will always be fantasizing about things. It doesn't have to be the same fantasy. You just have to learn, to put it in the right place, not not let it kind of like take over the way that it has. And I don't know, I think that accepting that different corners of my mind, what they are, and that they are there to stay, and I know this sounds it's kind of like defeatist to just accept that they're there, but it's been like a decade from like some of this, the fantasies, they changed with time, but like the fact that there are these fantasies that exist, the fact that this part of me that just wants the end, like these are parts of my brain that have always been there. If I have like an episode, maybe they don't show up for a while, whenever I'm manic, I'm less likely, the fantasies, they are more likely to happen. But the defeatist corner, I'm calling that the defeatist corner, like that doesn't show up so well as well. It may show up, there may be a hint of it, but usually it is somewhere else, and that's okay. That's okay. It is going to be there. Regardless, and I cannot really live in mania. It doesn't work for me. It doesn't work for anybody. Like living in mania or in depression, like that is not ideal. Like that's a bug. That's a bug. It's not a feature. Although to be fair, like if you count how often they happen, compared to like how long I'm living, how long my life is, and like how long of it there being like manic and depressive episodes, you just add everything up, it's basically, it makes you feel like it is a feature and not a bug. But like it comes and goes, and like technically everything comes and goes, so maybe I don't know, but I do think it does make sense. It makes sense to me, that saying that my fantasies and the defeatist corner, like they're features, and the mania and depression, they're bugs. They're bugs that they happen all the time, not all the time, but like they happen very frequently, enough for me to just kind of like, for them to be kind of like not just a problem, but for them to just feel like it's a part of it. And when you think about systems, there's a lot of them that have some bugs, and they're just very prevalent, so you kind of like, you look at them and you they're not part of the system, but they happen so often that you associate those bugs with the system in itself. So I feel like that's kind of like how I'm looking at the situation. They're not, they just show up. But the thing is, like, the only thing that kind of like gets in the way is because, like, bugs, they can be fixed, right? It can be hard, it can be, cause a lot of trouble, but like they can be fixed in theory. And these ones, they can't be fixed. I have my medication and it prevents a lot of things, but it doesn't really do without it. It is very much they're there. They will always be there, not constantly, but they show up. And I'm at this point where I don't want to try to think about my life, like how it would be without like those moments, those episodes, because it is, once again, unrealistic that it's not, and it's not good for me, because I'm basically fantasizing about something about reality that is not feasible, and that it won't happen. So it just leads to frustration. Like for example, this tattoo I have here, like this is the one that I got once I kind of accepted, like that I'm bipolar. I'm gonna have these episodes. That's kind of like the nature of it. I'm gonna do my best and try to make sure that these things don't get in the way of me living my life, and that I can live as normally as possible. But like it's always going to be there. So I got to just be like, yeah, I've accepted that this is me. This is part of me. And this was like many years ago. When was this? This was 2022. I mean, I wanted to get it a little bit sooner, but oh, there's like a very small gecko right there. It is, I don't know if you can see. Yeah, you left. But yeah, so there's a lot of geckos here, and like and you have some bigger ones and have some small ones. But anyways, what I was trying to say is that so this was 2022. I kind of like wanted it a little bit earlier, but at most it was like 2021. It was the beginning of it was like April 2022 that I got this, and I got the diagnosis at the very end of 2019. So it was a little while until like I kind of like embraced that, and the nature, and I kind of accepted that it wasn't going to change, that there are things I can do to make do, there are things that I can do that they will help, but like I can be fixed, and that's the thing with the bugs, like this can be fixed, and trying to look at it as something that can be fixed is just bad for your mental health, because you're gonna get frustrated when it doesn't work, because that's inevitable. But yeah, so as far as my head goes, I was kind of frustrated with where it went, the fences ended up feeding onto today. But if I look at it, just thinking about it in terms of like me kind of like accepting, it helped me, like what I gave voice to, it helped me accept a certain reality that was being very bothersome to me. And it was it was like a really tough pill to swallow. It was really hard. I was really struggling, and it has nothing to do with anything, basically. No, it does have something to do with, it has to do with something. It just doesn't have to do with like my personal life, and my life in general, and the things that are visible to me, the things that are happening here. It's just me being a little delusional, and just feeding into like those delusions. I mean, it's not that I think that those things are going to happen and then suddenly they're going to materialize in my life, but I had a lot of anger and hurt and pain that were associated with that, and I needed to kind of like find a way for me to just do it out, and I do without them. And I think I kind of did. I'm thinking about the thing right now, and it's not really bringing me as much pain as it was before. So in that sense, it did help. So it's accomplished something, and I think this is something that you have to kind of like acknowledge in life in general, not just having to do with your mental health. That sometimes for you to fix yourself, you're going to go through some processes that they're not particularly healthy. You wouldn't recommend them, but they happen, and they kind of like they help. They're not sustainable, which is why a lot of times like you don't want them to keep going. You want to find better coping mechanisms, but like for the extension of what it is, it does help. It does work to some extent. I just hope that I really kind of like close this chapter, that I can now move on to better things. In my better, I mean things that are more applicable to my life, and in this particular sense, it has to do with my writing. So I hope that I can actually write right now, and because that is something that is good for. It's good for the body, it's good for the soul, it's good for the mind, it's good for everything. At least for me, my writing is, it kind of like allows me to develop, develop skills, the skills required, like, for you to write, which, are various, it's not just, writing. So like, that's good. It helps me with, it occupies my time in a not productive, in a, productive is the wrong, it is productive, but like, not just productive, it is in a healthy way. Kind of like that, I'm doing something constructive. Yes, so something constructive, that's the word. And it is good, for me, and it's something that it gives me satisfaction, like right now as I'm writing, but it also will on the long run, when I finish this project, when I finish this novel and it's completed, and I'll have that satisfaction that I have from from the other novels I have, before. And that is something, that's also good for me to just look forward, to the future. Sometimes, I struggle with finding, a reason to exist. Like things, it's not that there aren't any reasons, it's just that they don't make sense to me at the point in time. And they also, I don't know, sometimes like they just, it's like they lose their spice. Like for example, I really like writing, but sometimes I have like no motivation, I have no ideas, I have no desire, I have no nothing. And it's not really, nothing changed about writing, it's just, my head. So, sometimes it happens, and it's kind of like, it is what it is. You have to just, when I say accept it, I don't mean just, just like resign yourself to doing nothing. It's just like, you accept the reality of your head, and then you try to work it out, do something, find, some loopholes right there. I think like loopholes are the best way to kind of like categorize, like these little gaps I find, because it is quite literally, it is a loophole. It is basically, something that it is not, wouldn't otherwise, work. It is pretty much the same thing. Like if I define it, it is the same thing that doesn't work. It's the same, but there's something there that, really, for some reason it works. And I can, sometimes you can tell right away like why exactly some things work and some other things don't. It's because sometimes you're more in a creative mood. Like you want to create things, you want to, work out like new things. Sometimes you are like in a development mood, like you don't want to create anything, but you want to develop what you already have. And sometimes you kind of like, you're good at both, sometimes you're good at neither, and that's just kind of like how it goes. So if you kind of are good at neither, something that, for example, I try to do is work on the the manuscript itself, on the formatting, and because then I'm getting work done. But it is not, it's not, the things that I'm struggling to kind of like get through. It's just, it's different. But yeah, so anyway, so that's kind of like, that's an example of a loophole. I'm working on the novel, but I am not working on the novel. I'm like fixing, just, like the spaces and the fonts and the sizes, and creating, like a table of contents, and, like, it's just like a whole lot of formatting. Because for example, something that you have to do, because you have, as like on top of the novels, you have one page you have the name of the novel, and on the other you have the author's name. And basically on the first page of a chapter, it is not really the case. So basically what you have to do is, like, after every chapter you have to kind of like start a new, I forgot the name of the thing, but like it's kind of like you're starting a new, yeah, I really forgot the word. It's kind of like you starting a new section. Yeah, that's just, you start a new section, and you have to do this for like every chapter, and there's like 3 parts, and they each have like around 70, no, not so much. I think there's like a little short of like 200 chapters right now, and no, actually like it's a little shorter than 200. Yeah, it's over 100. It's less than 200. I think it's closer to like 150. But basically you have to do that with like every chapter. So I don't, so for example, right now, if I'm in the mood to create something, I won't, be doing that. I'll leave it to when I'm feeling like not doing anything, neither creating nor developing. So yeah, and then there's the mood when you kind of like, and then when you want to create and develop at the same time, like that is just perfection, because basically you do both simultaneously, and like that is the ideal mindset for me. That's like how I wish I was every day. It is not the case, and it will never be the case. I have to kind of like accept that, because I think for the longest time I kind of like wanted my brain to operate in a way that it wouldn't. And not just like my brain, like nobody is at 100% all the time. I think like most people aren't at 100%, like almost never, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's just that we are human, we're not machines, we're not robots. So we are not going to be performing to like whatever, we need breaks, we need stimuli, we need motivation, we need like we need some more things. They're not really concrete, that like they're tangible, but like not in a concrete way. So like we need that, and that is just how humans work. This is kind of like all of us. I think that the whole is all of us. It kind of like helps because sometimes you feel, if you just think about yourself, you know, as an isolated factor, it feels like you are at a disadvantage. You know, it feels like, you know, you are, you know, lacking in something. But when you just, you know, open your eyes, you know, you just realize that like, nah, we are all struggling. And you know, there's some people who they may kind of like want, and that's something that I think has a lot to do with like perceptions, because people are going to kind of like show their way of living in a way that it seems that they are kind of like 100% of the time, and that is just not the truth. And I mean, I know that, you know, like I never really been foolish thinking that that could be the case, and yet I still demanded my body to kind of like operate at that level. And you know, kind of like being frustrated with yourself because you're not operating at whatever, you know, level you've established that you want yourself to operate in. It is one of the most frustrating things, because you know, it is the type of frustration that is very consistent and constant, because you're never going to get to that point. You know, you might operate at 100% sometimes, you know, at some part of the day, but like you won't be able to be at that level like 100% of the time. This is, you know, something that like kind of like mania, something I miss about mania, because usually when I'm not usually, but you know, sometimes when I'm manic, depending on like what I'm hyperfixating on and what I am doing, you know, and whatever, you know, because there's a lot of bullshit also that happens. Not bullshit, but there's a lot of like behaviors, lots of, you know, because you know, there's a lot of impulsivity, there's a lot of like desires, a lot of hunger, a lot of things, and you just kind of like end up like just doing those things without thinking. So even, you know, when I'm like manic and I'm like super productive, because I've had, you know, when I was in high school, today we look back and we're like, I'm probably having some manic episodes, but like sometimes I would not feel the need to sleep, so I wouldn't, and I would spend the night writing. And that was kind of like one of the ways that how I finished, you know, a novel in like less than a year, when I was in my senior year of high school, and I had an internship and I was working and I was studying full time. You know, I had the class in the morning, I had my internship in the afternoon, and I had other, you know, how do you call it, extracurricular activities, you know, and I was volunteering and doing things. I was doing a lot of things, and I was able to finish a novel that year. And now I look back and it's like, yeah, mania, you know, I was doing all those things. I was operating at the highest kind of like level, and I kind of like, I miss doing that sometimes, even though lots of like there were negative things as well that came from, you know, like those periods of times. I mean, it's kind of easy for it to just look back in a very romanticized way of me just being like, yeah, it was great, I was able to write a novel, you know, in a year, and you know, just do a lot of other things, and not really, you know, neglect all the other things I was doing before. But there was a lot of like negatives too, of like, you know, me being more impulsive. I'm already pretty impulsive, has to do with like my ADHD, I guess. And then, you know, had mania, and then I'm just, you know, I don't want to mention actually like the more specific things, because I don't know, it's kind of interesting, because sometimes I go through periods where I'm like, it's not that I'm like not embracing those things right now, because I fully am. I fully like, okay, that's kind of like the case, you know, that happened. But sometimes like I really, you know, I lean onto like some of like those facets of when I'm manic, as if like that was me all the time, because there are certain things that you can gain, you know what I mean, like emotionally wise, you know, like if you're kind of like lost trying to figure out who you are and you're forming a certain identity, you know, some of the things that I did when I was manic, like they kind of can become part of the identity, and you know, they and it's kind of, but like it's not super real, because I'm not like that all the time. I'm only that like that some of the time, and you know, and then, you know, if I'm not like that everywhere, I feel like I'm lacking, you know, like that's, you know, great way to put it. I feel like if I'm not doing those things, then there's something wrong with me, you know, that is no, that's not something wrong with me, but like then I have to actually do those things, you know, do, you know, risky things that I don't, you know, when I'm like normal, you know, when, and normal I mean when I'm not manic or depressed, like I have a sense of danger. I have, you know, I perceive danger in a way that I don't when I'm manic. So there are things that, you know, they're very risky that I did and I do, and I mean those periods that, you know, when I'm not and I'm trying to impose like that on me, it just makes me uncomfortable, because like that isn't me all the time. It's me when I'm in like in that context, you know. I've come to accept that it's me, because that is also something else you can do. I think people do that also when they're talking about how they're drunk and they're kind of like a different person, but like you're not, you're just like a version of yourself that, you know, is lacking inhibitions. And so it's the same thing, like, so I don't like to think about me when I'm depressed or me when I'm manic as, being like a different, me. It's not, it's just me at a different time, but it's still like all those actions, I still did all those things, I still had all those thoughts, I still had I took those actions, so it's still me. And I think that's kind of like how things should be. You should acknowledge this thing of like creating. I understand the the mindset. You kind of like trying to distance yourself from things, particularly like if you want to change, for good, right? Like you just look at that at your old you. I think like that can be helpful. Like as long as you kind of like acknowledge the things that you've done, particularly like if they bring harm to people. Because for in my case, like most of the harm was like directed towards myself. There was not really much for like outward harm, like outwardly. So like I can just be like, yeah, whatever, it's a different version of myself. And because there's no kind of like there were consequences for those things, but like not for other people, just for me. But like if you the old version of you, or like the other version of you, like is harming people, it's hurting people, then there's you shouldn't really like, you should forgive and forget all that, right? But you can't. It is people, if you hurt somebody, like it is their prerogative to hold it against you. You can't just force them to kind of like accept something. You can apologize, you can try to make amends, but it still is up to them, how they react. I don't know why the conversation steered in this direction. It's nothing to do with anything. And also, like, I know I'm talking a lot right now, and this does get me worried that I might be switching into being a little manic, because at least for me, I mean, there's been times when it was very much an on and off switch, and it's like one day I go to bed, I'm normal, and then I wake up and I'm manic, or depressed. But a lot of times, like, there is a certain change, there's a certain there's a shift, it's not like it's like like those, there's not on and off, the ones that you use kind of like a switch around. My hands are kind of shaking. There's something that also is exacerbated, when I'm manic, is that, for example, I shake a lot because of medication I'm taking, and then it's kind of like it intensifies everything physical that, happening. So sometimes, yeah, another thing, I don't know. I'm talking a lot, and it's good I'm talking, because as I said, I was frustrated. I was feeling very unhappy, and frustrated with myself. Not like super happy regarding like my circumstances and the day. I was kind of like happy about that, but I was a little frustrated and a little unhappy with myself. And then I've been talking for the past 32 minutes. Oh my god. Yeah, that's longer than I was expecting. That I was anticipating. And right now I'm feeling much better. I'm not feeling, that unhappy at all. I think I've been able to convince myself that what happened was no good for me, and that is that. I don't know. Whew. So yeah, I think I'm gonna wrap this up right now. I think I was able to, kind of like cover all my bases. Talking about like how my head was, in this very unhelpful cycle, but then I realized that it was not so unhelpful, because it just helped me heal in a way, like helped me, that thing that was bothering me is bothering me less right now. And that thing that was bothering me, it was like not something that, it's kind of like a thorn, but like not the worst thorn. It is one that, it's kind of like it's there, but it's kind of like the pain, it kind of like builds. It's not something that was like so much in my face, and it was at the back of my head, and it would go back to that every once in a while, and I would be unhappy with a variety of things, with the situation itself, but also with my life in comparison, when you contrast and you compare and contrast. So like I'm kind of like over that now. And hopefully I will be able to, because it's something I mentioned, that like while I've been having these fantasies that I'm not really approving of, I've been able to kind of like shift, also, so I'm not really, stuck with this mindset, which was the case before. I can actually just go, today was kind of harder because I was very invested, but I still, right now I can just like switch and just go, to something that has to do with my writing, and something that is going to be much more productive for me. Not that productivity is the goal, because I am on vacation, so like the goal here is like relaxation, healing, and that is happening. I think that today that happened on a physical level and on an emotional level, so that's great. So yes, anyways, bye.